And our first talk is going to be a special keynote, one of the first presentations I secured for the program, which I've been very much looking forward for the last 6 months or so. For this presentation, we are going to learn something about the one of the best-known e-commerce brands in Europe called Zalando. And it's going to be presented by two people. Head of design, Kaufmann. He's based in Berlin, I guess. And Vilma Sirainen, a product designer, and she's based here in Finland and speaks wonderful English. Please welcome Jay and Vilma.
Thank you. It's great to be here today. So, like you just heard, I'm Vilma, and this is Jay. And the title of our presentation is Bringing Data to Life, Principles for Leveraging Machine Power for Human Good. Today, we'll be telling you some personal stories about our relationship to data, and also tell you about a project that we're working on. But first, we'll introduce ourselves.
So my name is Jay Kaufmann. I grew up in the Midwest of the United States, and then I worked for 11 years in Seattle, where I started my career, and moved to Berlin, Germany 16 years ago. I'm happy to be here.
And I'm Vilma. I was actually born here in Finland, but I grew up and worked most of my life in the US, in Florida, Virginia, and California. I started in startups, then moved into the agency world, and now I work at Zalando, here in the Helsinki office. There's about 100 of us there, and I'm one of 2 designers. Also, as you can see, music is a really big part of my life.
So at Zalando, we play design. And because Finns are some of our best customers, many of you might know Zalando, know that we are equal parts fashion company and tech company. And we are very fast growing. So this week, we are celebrating our 10th anniversary as a company. And in that short amount of time, we've been able to exceed 4.5 billion euros in revenue and expand to 17 countries.
And with over 24 million active customers and over 300,000 products, we have some big data.
And big data excites designers. So maybe many of you don't know this. I don't know if this campaign ran in Finland, but in 2012, Zalando was known in France and Germany for its television commercials of customers screaming for joy. And although we've advanced in our advertising, we've become a little bit more evolved and more contemporary. It still really excites me that actually the company from the very beginning was really focused on customer joy. But when you talk about the expression that designers have in relation to data, the expression could be a little bit more ambiguous. So some designers get excited about data, and some designers are a little bit fearful of data. So what happens when I teach the machines to design the UI? Am I going to be out of a job? So our colleague Ray Ho had some thoughts about these that he, together with Vilma, actually shared at IXDA here in Helsinki a while back. But we'd like to brush that aside today because we're a couple of the designers who get really excited about data and work in the geekiest part of the company. So what we'd like to talk about is how might we create rich data points that really create a dynamic, personal, and very human experience for our customers. So before we do that, I'd just like to share a little bit of a very personal story about my experience of data. So my first view of data when I was a child was this. So my father was a finance professor, and at the university he used punch cards to input data. My own first personal job related to data, it was a summer job in the basement of the bank, and I was changing the tape reels. So I've been around for a little while, and I've seen things change. But back then, actually, so my first computer used a really nice form of data. It was very tactile and very mobile and flexible. Little did I realize how much more mobile and flexible data would become as we move into cloud computing. And the way that data was displayed was on a computer like this. The resolution was quite low, but it was pretty fun. So now we've advanced quite a bit. So we've advanced in terms of display resolution, we've advanced in terms of data, but we've also added a layer of logic on top of that that can really create more rich, fluid, and immersive experiences. And Vilma's going to share an experience about that.
And like I mentioned before, growing up, I played music. So when I was 8, I started the violin. And then when I got my electric violin as a teenager, that's when I started really like playing around with music tools, music technology tools. And just last year, I was really amazed with the power of how AI can help you creatively like never before. So this artist, producer, Alex the Kid, teamed up with IBM's Watson and wrote a song about heartbreak. He could see millions of people and what they felt about heartbreak. And then he wrote the song. And he said, with Watson, it's almost like having 1 million of yourself reading 1 million books at once and 1 million articles and understanding social media. I could never do that.
So to kind of structure our thinking around this, I'd like to introduce a mixed metaphor. I really actually liked Tom's pyramid, and I'm going to present something that's a little bit different. I'm going to start with the iceberg, which just simply represents that for anything visible, there's much, much more below the surface. And if you add a pyramid on top of that, it can kind of create this idea of, of building blocks. And this is the user experience pyramid, basically, that I've been using for many years to explain that just below the surface of any experience is this usability layer that no one notices unless they bump into it. If we as designers are doing our job correctly, what people see is this joy of use in the actual experience. And of course, the foundation of it all is something useful or meaningful for people. And as I was thinking about speaking here, I was thinking about how might we repurpose this pyramid to data. Actually, I had these conversations several months ago as well when I was working in Dublin with the team there. What are the levels of data? And I would submit that the data is this rich foundational layer providing a lot of foundation for an intelligence layer that can interpret that then can create an experience. So the question that I'd like to pose, and I thought it might be a little bit of a provocative question here today at Data-Driven Design Day, is if you think about this kind of setup, what's really driving the product? And I totally agree with Jan. I'm like 100%. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Let's be more serious about how we talk about data. And I think that data-driven is an inflated term, but I'd also like to submit that perhaps it's also a misnomer. Data is the foundation of everything. It's the medium that we work with, but is it really driving the experience? For me, if you put I don't know, you have the driving is like a vehicle experience, right? If you have a driver, is it the data or is the data fueling the experience? If you think about where's the vision for the product coming from, it generally comes from the top of the pyramid, doesn't it? So shouldn't we have experience-driven, intelligence-enabled, and data-founded design? So I'd like to go into talking about some design principles that we might be able to take home with us to use in our daily work that can help us to direct ourselves. But before I get to that, I'd like to just share some of my personal ideas that I had when I started in a new role at Zalando about 6 months ago. So I had been building up the team, the design practice, growing in number and maturity of the team. And I moved into a role where I was leading hands-on design within the search and personalization areas, which includes topics around intent and sizing and lots of the really geeky topics within the company. And I was really excited about this. And some of my initial, perhaps naive ideas were, for instance, around information architecture. So if you think about a typical category tree, it's something quite brittle and static. And if we have a rich layer of data that we can add semantic meaning to, how can we make wayfinding much more dynamic and much more individualized and much more multidimensional? So this is kind of one of the questions that I put to myself is, what is IA in the age of AI? And another thing that I find quite interesting, even though it seems somewhat pedantic or banal, is the concept that when you have a lot of product images that are shot on a relatively neutral background, it's relatively easy for the system to sort things in terms of relevance and present them in a nice way to the customer. But also, what happens there, if you want to create more dynamic content, if you want to inject more color into your catalog, then you start having to worry about the relationships between these in an aesthetic way. And how might we teach the machines to sort things not just by logic, but also to lay out pages in a meaningful and aesthetic way? Slightly related to that is kind of, I keep questioning myself, why don't we see more dynamic cropping today? As we're designing responsive and adaptive experiences, why aren't machines cropping the photos rather than we just resizing them and keeping the same dimensions? Why aren't machines more active there? So these are kind of some of the things that I was thinking about. And then I wanted to take a step back and reverse engineer a little bit. Okay, what are the kinds of principles that we can pull out of this to help us do our work on a daily basis? So I'm going to run through this quite quickly so that we can also share a case study. But the idea of having these heuristics is it ties into what Alina said earlier, that we, what was the quote? I have the quote in my pocket, actually. She said, all right, we had to change many things down the line. So heuristics should inspire us as designers to come up with ideas ahead of time so that we can help shape how the data is structured. And also, it's a reality check. So data-driven design, we want to measure everything that we do. But at what point can we measure it effectively in a scientific way? Heuristics are a way to, in a less scientific and less precise way, make design decisions earlier in the process. So how might we create a set of principles that guide designers by inspiring them and by also helping us make decisions about how we set the course? So I liken this to, like, okay, what kind of questions do we want to ask ourselves? The Quakers, they have this concept of queries. They don't have statements of belief, but they have questions that they ask themselves to keep them on track. Or Zen Buddhists have koans that they give themselves. They're questions without answers that are meant to like kind of scramble your brain and lead you one step closer to enlightenment. So this is design heuristics for me are that for designers. So I was thinking about that again this weekend. I was out in the country in near Berlin, about 2 hours outside of Berlin in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. And I saw this log cabin, which reminded me of the email that Lassie had sent about this. We're going to talk about seamless experiences. And it reminded me also of my days studying art. So in art school, we were taught to pay particular attention to the connections between things, to the joints. So, and being out in the country was also an inspiration because most of the principles that we talk about in terms of bringing data to life really draw upon nature. And we saw that earlier in some of the presentations here today too. So the first area that I'd like to explore is organic. So organic compounds are the basis of all life. So how might we see whether, how might we check with ourselves whether an experience falls where an experience falls on the spectrum between organic and digital, for instance. And within this concept, I've noticed when I was out in the country here that nature doesn't really have abrupt endings, except where humans have intervened, in this case here, or when things have died, also in this case here. Nature makes much more fluid connections between things. So how might we take this as inspiration to weave seamless connections in our work? How might we identify which connections can we insert into this place in the customer journey to make things meaningful? How can we make the right connections between data? Are we allowing users to already begin their next move here in context? Have we accentuated the beginnings and endings in a way that feels good to this experience? Another thing about, for instance, sand is it fills any form really nicely. And the carbon molecule is a special molecule, which is the basis of life, and it's special because it has a huge diversity of how it can combine with itself, much more than any kinds of other molecules. And so how can we as designers take inspiration to fill whatever container we have? How can we adapt to any kind of imaginal environment? Do we have the content organized in a way that is able to adapt to its environment or to its container? And does the system, does it figure out where the worn path is? Where are customers going? And then the next bigger category was dynamic. So on this spectrum of dynamic to static, how can we figure out how to create living experiences? Because life is always changing. So one thing that's a pretty standard heuristic already is to give immediate response. Actually, so this one seems pretty obvious, but we had a case actually recently where a team wanted to start collecting data so that they could deliver the customer value then 2 months later. And we actually had some draft customization principles in place that talked about the necessity of immediate feedback and showing benefit, but the team wanted to try it, so we said, okay, let's put it in front of users. So we did a quick prototype, we put it in front of users, and it was really great to see how the team could watch people getting really upset about getting kind of tricked into giving their data, but not getting something back for it in that moment. So does your user input show direct, immediate effect? Can the system feedback create a sense of tactile immediacy? How can we do that in a digital medium? And are the rewards of the interaction clearly visible? So how can we make, for instance, visible to customers in what way the experience is personalized to them? And then another area is in terms of this seamless experiences theme is choreographing fluid transitions in time. So can we break the page metaphor but still retain a sense of place? Can the experience in front of the users, can it happen in front of the user's own eyes instead of behind the scenes? What kind of workings of the system can we make visible to the user to make them see what's happening? And what micro animations might underscore meaning here? And then the last category is human. So of course, we as human-centered designers want to create more human experiences. And humans are very interesting creatures. We're a chemical and biological system that's quite complex. So how might we engage emotions? By interpreting emotional states to respond empathetically, by seeing what intent signals we can mine in order to deliver delight to the customer, and by figuring out what tone is appropriate here. Okay, where do we want to be humorous? Where do we want to take somebody by the hand, express caring? Where do we want to give advice? So think about how might we engage users in an emotional way. And another human characteristic is curiosity. So we want to learn new things. So how might we teach machines to dialogue with customers, to learn from them, to get something out of the transaction that they can then use to make the experience better in the future? And how can we do a lot of things behind the scenes to understand what we think the user wants, and then make it super easy for them to go along that path and confirm our assumption, or to take a step back and course correct. So putting all these three things together, organic, dynamic, human experiences, how might we then make that into an experience that is meaningful for customers? So those are some queries that we had, and we will now have Vilma tell you about a concrete case study with the algorithmic fashion companion, which actually we're not officially talking about until later this month. So you're getting a sneak preview of some interesting ways that we're using machine learning to give some recommendations to customers.
So Zalando has a very large assortment of fashion and beauty products, and this is key for serving a mass market. But to make it make sense for each of our individual customers, we need personalization. And we have a team for that, actually several teams in both Helsinki and Berlin. Our purpose is to create a unique and inspiring Zalando experience, custom tailored for every single individual. So that means that we would create a unique boutique for each of our millions of customers. So what does that mean? Imagine that you're going into a store and you need to find an outfit for your friend's wedding. And maybe the store clerk knows you, so she might know your size, what colors you're comfortable wearing. You might tell her that the wedding is in the summer by the lake, and then she might suggest some accessories like your shoes and a purse, or your tie and a pocket square that are the blues of the water or the greens of the forest. Then you might respond that, you don't want to stand out too much or be too colorful. And then she might say, well, how about these more neutral things instead? So how could we create something like this for each one of our millions of customers and still have it feel organic, dynamic, human, and ultimately meaningful? So enter some of our first iterations of the algorithmic fashion companion. And simply put, it recommends you outfits based on something that we call an anchor item. And here you can see an outfit that's recommended based on your past purchase that you've also kept. And in this case, this dress here. And it's recommending these things to complete this dress. Another way that it can help you is on your wish list. So this time recommending an outfit around something that you've saved. So here you can see you've saved this skirt, and it's recommending these to complete your outfit. And right now it's live in the DACH area, so Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. But pretty soon it'll be live in all of our locations, and it'll be even more personalized than it is today. So how does something like this start? Well, like with any project, understanding your customer. And here are 6 of our customers. And at Zalando, we call these representations portraits. And I'll focus on Chloe and Uma. Chloe's in green, and Uma's there in the pink. And Chloe is someone who might say that yep, I feel comfortable with all the clothes that I wear normally because I know they work. I don't really want to stand out, but it would be nice if I could dress more stylish. But how can I pull that off? Does anybody know a Chloe in this room? Does that sound familiar? Yeah? Okay, some of you, yeah. And Uma, she's on the other side of the spectrum, where she's really confident about her fashion, and she wants to stand out. She wants to turn heads. And for her, she has her style, and it's easy for her to find things that suit her. So you can see Chloe has maybe a stronger need for validation whereas Uma has a stronger need for this inspiration to inspire her own creativeness. So you can see an algorithmic fashion companion could look very different for each one of them. But let's zoom in on Chloe and then look at her problems and how we can help her solve her problems. So with difficulty combining, how might we help her combine her old and new fashion pieces into outfits, but at a scale for millions of customers? Too many choices. So how might we surface the most relevant choices so the number of options isn't so overwhelming? And how about that lack of confidence? How might we be more transparent about personalization to reassure her that she can pull off that style? So as we're learning about our customers, we also want our algorithms to really understand our customers too. So we dream up algorithms that understand fashion and outfits, how to put things together, discern each customer's taste, because it's very individual. It's how you're expressing yourself. Identify intent in the moment. So remember, it could be that you're trying to find that outfit for your friend's lakeside wedding. And then converse with the customer. Have that natural dialogue about, do you want to stand out at the wedding, and where are these things, so on. So behind the scenes, in evaluating our algorithms, we asked ourselves, how can we get an algorithmic quality that's as good as human quality? And then taking a step back, what is human quality anyway? So the only way to really measure this is to pit them against each other. So we conducted this Turing-like test, and it's interesting. I just had to remember playing video games, the Street Fighter game, where to me, I envisioned it as algorithms on the one side, and then the human curated training sets on the other side. And they're battling in the background in this test. So we showed 120 fashion experts and other employees at Zalando 100 outfits. So here's an example of what they saw, an example outfit. And we asked them how they would rate each one. They could choose from 3 answers: very good, acceptable, bad. And if they chose bad, then they could choose from a drop-down of these problem types, like was it related to color or style, or etc. If there was something else, then they could choose other and fill that in. There's also an open comment field. So what did we learn? Well, one algorithm performed slightly better than its human training set, and then the other one slightly worse. And I think one of the most important things that we learned is that style and taste are a very personal thing, because it's about how you individually want to express yourself. And that's why personalization is really important here. Another thing that we learned were some of these rules for combining items, characteristics, and categories. So one example is that really colorful and patterned shoes were difficult to combine. Another example is jewelry to different necklines. And then an example of a tough category was maternity clothes. That was more difficult. And then also to consider seasonal trends. And what I mean by this, for example, is here's Vogue saying, pink and red is the new black and white. And in the past, pink and red was this fashion no-no. But then this past summer, it was a really big thing. So taking into account these trends. Now, balancing each of these 3 things, it's really tricky at scale, but we're getting there. And overall, in the end, it's really important to really instill these human insights into these algorithms in the very beginning, because otherwise you're just playing a game of whack-a-mole. So you're just reacting to problems as they pop up, like the mole in this game. And it's really hard to create anything useful. And I'm curious, who here knows about whack-a-mole or has played whack-a-mole? Okay, it's a thing here too. Nice. So we're on our way to creating this unique boutique for each of our millions of customers. And I want to explain to you with this graph, like what that means and how we can do this at scale, something that we couldn't have been done before. So first, in the 4 individual manual quadrant, This is handpicked for you. A person will help you find exactly what you want. Then moving into the for everyone manual quadrant, we've got handpicked for all. Here's what's popular in season. Automated for everyone, auto-related to this. So if you like this, you're more like it. And then the exciting area that we're cracking, this auto-relevant for you. All of these are tailored to your specific likes and in the moment goals. And this is that powerful area where we can really do what we do at scale. And it's interesting because I remember when I was giving this talk at another conference that I talked with a lot of you, and even though we're doing this for fashion, I heard that there are many of you working on this quadrant, the auto-relevant for you, in your industries, like education and healthcare. And I thought, how's that for living in a world-changing time right now? So that's why I want to end this with this call to action that we really need more people like you to really instill these human insights into algorithms and create human-centered AI in whatever industry that you're in. And yep, this is our time. Let's do it.
So this is our office in Helsinki here. If you want to come by and have a conversation about these kinds of topics at some point, we do host some meetups and so forth.
You can take a swing on one of the swings. It's fun.
Thanks, guys, for coming up. This was actually very interesting and insightful presentation, and I'm very glad that you decided to share something that's kind of still upcoming and kind of very new for, I think, everyone in the audience.